Forget the gold. Forget the gods. The most extraordinary story of ancient Egypt isn't locked inside a pharaoh's tomb. It's simmering in a clay pot on the muddy bank of the Nile. Here is the truth that most history books quietly skip past. 3,300 years ago, at the height of the New Kingdom, when Ramesses the Great ruled an empire stretching from Syria to Sudan, the vast majority of Egyptians were not warriors or priests or scribes. They were farmers, exhausted, sun-scorched, perpetually hungry farmers whose entire existence was dictated not by the will of the pharaoh, but by the mood of a single river. And what they ate, day in and day out, from birth to death, was so different from the lavish feasts you might imagine that it would genuinely surprise you. If you want to understand who the ancient Egyptians really were, subscribe now and stay close, because there is so much more of this hidden history to come. So, let us begin at dawn, on the west bank of the Nile, somewhere near the great city of Thebes, in a small mud-brick village that history has largely forgotten. The sun rises fast over the eastern desert. Nobody stops to admire it. There is too much work to do. The annual flood, the great inundation the Egyptians called Akhet, has retreated, leaving behind a thick, glistening layer of black silt across every field. This silt is the single most precious substance in all of Egypt, more valuable than gold, more vital than any offering laid before any god, because it is this dark, river-deposited soil, renewed every single year like clockwork, that makes the Nile Valley one of the most fertile strips of land on the entire planet. And it is this fertility that feeds an empire. The foundation of everything, the thing that kept this civilization alive for 3,000 years, was grain, specifically emmer wheat and barley. These were not just food, they were currency, they were medicine. Workers were paid in grain. Temples were funded by grain. The entire administrative machinery of the Egyptian state revolved around collecting it, storing it, and giving it back out again. The pharaoh's true power was not measured only in armies or monuments, but in how many grain jars sat inside his storehouses. From emmer wheat came bread, and bread was everything. Not the soft, pillowy loaves we might pull from a modern oven. This was dense, dark, intensely flavorful bread, baked in tall conical clay molds set over an open fire, shaped into rounds and flat discs and cones. Wealthy households baked theirs, seasoned with cumin and coriander. Poorer households made do with plain, heavy loaves that were coarse enough to slowly grind down the enamel of their teeth over a lifetime. Modern archaeologists examining Egyptian mummies have confirmed this grim detail. Virtually every adult Egyptian had severely worn teeth by middle age. Not from sugar, but from the tiny fragments of grinding stone and desert sand that inevitably ended up in the flour during milling. The price of simply eating. Alongside bread, the Egyptians brewed beer. Enormous, industrial quantities of beer. And this was nothing like the cold, sparkling lager in a modern glass. Egyptian beer was thick, cloudy, reddish-brown, and nutritious, closer to liquid bread than a recreational drink. It was made by fermenting partially baked loaves in water, straining the result through rush baskets, and sealing it into tall clay jars. Every household made it. Every worker drank it from sunrise to sunset. Children drank a weaker version. The water of the Nile, however sacred, was not always safe to drink untreated. Beer, with its mild fermentation killing off waterborne dangers, was the safest liquid available. A laborer working on the royal tombs at Deir el-Medina received, as his daily wage, 10 loaves of bread and 2 large jars of beer. Every single day. That was not a luxury. That was survival rations. Now, bread and beer were the bedrock. But ordinary Egyptians had more variety than you might expect. The Nile teemed with fish. Tilapia, catfish, and Nile perch were pulled from the river in woven reed baskets or caught on bone fishhooks. Fish was the most accessible protein for anyone living near the water. It was eaten fresh and roasted over coals. But far more often it was salted and dried in the fierce Egyptian sun until it could last for months, then traded inland and transported across the desert to workers who might not see the river for weeks at a time. Dried fish was the ancient Egyptian equivalent of tinned food. Here is something that surprises most people. Ordinary Egyptians did not eat much meat, not out of principle, simply because it was expensive. Cattle were wealth. Slaughtering a cow was a significant event, usually tied to a religious festival or a temple sacrifice. The priests who conducted those sacrifices ate beef regularly because they received their share of every animal offered. For everyone else, it was a rare treat. What people ate instead was a practical and surprisingly varied range of alternatives. Lentils boiled into thick soups, chickpeas and fava beans mashed into a paste that would be recognizable today as the ancestor of foul mesdames, a dish still eaten across Egypt every morning more than 3,000 years later. Pigeons were kept in tall mud brick towers and provided an easy, low-cost source of meat. Ducks and geese laid eggs and eventually ended up in the pot themselves. And then there were onions. The ancient Egyptians were, by all accounts, completely passionate about them. Onions, garlic, and leeks were not mere flavorings. They were dietary staples consumed in vast quantities at every level of society. Greek travelers visiting Egypt centuries later would remark with bafflement that the working classes seemed to survive almost entirely on raw onions and bread. Herodotus claimed that the cost of the onions, garlic, and radishes eaten by the workers who built the Great Pyramid was actually inscribed on the pyramid itself. Scholars debate whether that is literally true, but it speaks volumes about how central these humble roots were to Egyptian life. Onions were offered to the gods. They were placed in the wrappings of mummies, small dried spheres found pressed against the eye sockets of the dead, perhaps to help them see in the afterlife. Egypt was, in the most literal sense, a civilization built on bread, beer, and onions. The vegetable gardens of the Nile floodplain were surprisingly productive. Cucumbers, lettuces, melons, sweet and cooling in the heat, radishes and celery, dates, dried and stored and carried everywhere, provided concentrated energy and sweetness that made them essential for laborers and travelers alike. Figs were widely eaten. Pomegranates were more prestigious, often depicted in tomb paintings as offerings fit for gods. Wine existed, produced in the vineyards of the Nile Delta and sealed in labeled clay amphorae, the world's earliest wine labels. But like beef, wine was largely a drink of the elite. Ordinary people might taste it at a festival. The pharaoh's court drank it daily. Step inside a typical kitchen of the New Kingdom period, not the palace but the rooftop cooking space of a skilled craftsman's household, and what you find is a beehive-shaped clay oven radiating fierce heat, a large fermenting vat of half-made beer, and a wide-bellied clay cooking pot set over charcoal. Into that pot goes whatever the day has provided: lentils with cumin and garlic, a stew of dried fish with onions and fresh coriander, a soup of chickpeas thickened with emmer flour. If the household is prosperous, a duck spatchcocked over the coals, its skin crisping and splitting in the heat. No knives, no forks. Food was scooped and eaten with torn pieces of bread, the way it had always been done, the way it would be done for centuries to come. Salt was used heavily as a preservative. Honey, harvested from clay beehives kept near the fields, was the primary sweetener, used both in cooking and in medicine. Egyptian medical papyri are full of remedies built around honey, and they were not wrong to use it. The antibacterial properties of honey, understood empirically long before anyone had a word for bacteria, made it genuinely effective. Cumin, coriander, fenugreek, dill, the spice palette of the ancient Egyptian kitchen was sophisticated and alive. What strikes you, stepping back from all of this, is how recognizable it feels. Not in its tools, but in its logic. These people ate seasonally because they had no choice. They preserved obsessively because a failed flood meant famine. They used spices because even people with very little still cared how their food tasted. They gathered at the end of a long, brutal day and shared what they had. They fed their children first. They celebrated festivals with special foods and offered their best to their gods. The farmers of the Nile Valley in 1300 BC were not so very different from anyone who has ever had to wrest a meal from the earth with their own hands and make it stretch as far as it would go. They built the longest-lived civilization in human history, 3,000 years of unbroken culture, on a foundation of bread, beer, dried fish, lentils, and onions. The next time you tear a piece of flatbread or scoop up a bowl of lentil soup, you are, without quite knowing it, eating the food of pharaohs. Not the one on the golden throne, the real ones. The ones with flour on their hands and fire in their ovens and a long day's work still ahead of them. The river gives. The river takes. And between those two certainties, a civilization ate.